Welcome back, folks, to another skill review. I'm Frizz, and today we're going to be covering the Intimidation skill from Pathfinder 2e. Intimidation is a very versatile skill for both RP and combat, and it has one of the most useful skill actions to use for debuffing enemies in the entire game. I really don't feel like I have to spend that much time describing exactly what the skill called Intimidation does, so let's just jump right into things. The first of the two built-in actions that the Intimidation skill can be used for is the Coerce action. It's all about making people so scared of you that they do whatever you say or that they give you information that you're looking for. It's not the best for making friends, but it can get the job done in a pinch. You have to spend at least 1 minute in a conversation with someone, and then you're able to make an intimidation check against their will DC to see whether or not you're intimidating to that person specifically. If you critically succeed, then they do whatever you say and give you whatever you're trying to ask for, as long as the actions that they're taking aren't likely to actively hurt someone. You can't say, hey, go and kill this person for me, because most people are going to be really resistant to doing that. But you might be able to intimidate them into, say, giving you some of their own possessions. They will then comply for an amount of time determined by the GM, but it's going to be less than 1 day, and it's almost certainly going to be enough time for them to do whatever you've asked them to do. Once they aren't scared of you, which is generally going to be about a day, then they become unfriendly to you. Though they are still a bit scared because you're still really intimidating and you critically succeeded against them, so they are not likely to actually retaliate to you in any reasonable way in the short term. Over time, if you don't show up and intimidate them again, then they might retaliate to you like a month or so in the future, but in the short term, they're a bit too concerned about you beating their face in to do anything against you. If you only normally succeed, then you get pretty much the exact same result as if you critically succeeded. Though, once they are no longer, coerced into doing something, and that effect wears off, they're unfriendly, and they are probably going to retaliate. So they might report you to the guard, or they might just actively assist your enemies. Whatever happens, they are now going to be probably actively trying to get in your way. If you fail on your intimidation check, then they just become unfriendly. They don't give in to your commands, and they are unfriendly because you literally just threatened them. If you critically fail, then it gets even worse, because they don't give in to your commands, and they also immediately become hostile, which hostile doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to immediately try and kill you, but it does mean that they're going to actively go out of their way to make your life miserable. So with a unfriendly shopkeep, they might not sell you anything, but a hostile shopkeep might try and get you barred from going into any of the shops in the same district as them. So hostile is way worse than unfriendly. The other action directly baked into Intimidate is Demoralize. It's something that you can do no matter what, and you roll an intimidation check against someone who you can understand the language of's will DC within 30 feet of you. And you're just trying to demoralize them. This is a single action, and if you succeed, they become Frightened 1, and if you critically succeed, they become Frightened 2. Frightened is one of the strongest conditions in the entire game, and I cannot understand the value of being able to apply it with a single action. You don't have to be trained to actually demoralize someone, but you probably have to be trained to succeed at demoralizing someone. But being able to reduce pretty much every single one of a creature's abilities by 1 for 1 action is fantastic quality. Now, there is something to keep in mind here, which is if you don't share a language with someone, then you take a -4 penalty on your Demoralize check, which is not guaranteed to make it impossible, but it will make it substantially more difficult. Thankfully, there is a skill feat that fixes that for you, but we're about to get to those. Now, something that you might have noticed whenever I was talking about Coercion is that this only actually works whenever you're trying to demoralize or coerce one person. Group Coercion changes that, so whenever you use the Coercion action specifically, you can compare your intimidation check result to the will DCs of 2 targets instead of 1. And it is possible to actually get a different degree of success for each target, because you might be trying to coerce a level 1 person and a level 5 person at the same time. So there's likely to be a pretty substantial difference in the actual results of your check in that situation. And the higher that your proficiency in intimidation gets, the more people that you can actually coerce at the same time. If you are an expert in intimidation, you can coerce 4 people at the same time. If you're a master, then you can coerce 10, and if you're legendary, you can coerce 25. This is really fun because you can coerce an entire bar to just, hey, take this outside. I need to talk to them personally. Or you could try and coerce, say, an entire gang or just a group of people. This makes coercion a little bit more reliable, because normally having to do it on one person at a time and you're not being intimidated to the other people is a little bit problematic. But with group coercion, you can absolutely use this a bit more freely in a group situation. You don't have to get people alone anymore. Intimidating Glare is that skill feat that I talked about that makes Demoralize a lot easier to use on creatures that you don't share a language with, as once you have Intimidating Glare, you can choose to Demoralize with just a glare. This means that Demoralize loses the auditory trait and gains the visual trait. And you lose the penalty if the creature that you're trying to demoralize doesn't understand your language. This makes demoralizing so much easier, because so many fights in Pathfinder are against mindless creatures, or against animals, or just against things that don't share your language. And now you don't have to deal with the language barrier anymore, which is legitimately a lifesaver. Quick coercion is also pretty useful for coercing people. You can now coerce someone with a single round of conversation rather than a full minute of conversation, which is substantially better. You still can't actually do this in the midst of combat or without engaging in a conversation at all, but being able to coerce someone that fast is a great way of making it a lot more reasonable, because now you can just butt into a conversation and instantly coerce someone, almost, which is fantastic. Intimidating Prowess is a little bit of an interesting feat that will rely a bit on GM interpretation to really tell you how good this actually is. It requires that you're an expert in intimidation and that you have a 16 strength, which is a bit to ask for a character that's going to be demoralizing a lot. But it is very good, in the right situations if your GM allows it. In situations where you can actually use your physicality to aid in your coercion or demoralize, you get a +1 circumstance bonus on your intimidation checks, and you ignore the penalty for not sharing a language. If your strength score is a 20 or higher, and you are a master in intimidation, then the bonus increases to a +2. Now, the issue is that this is pretty nebulous. Being able to physically demoralize someone is a little bit different, because how exactly are you going to do that? You're going to have to rationalize that and explain that, which is fairly easy to do. It's like, oh, I want to rough up their counter, or I want to say, oh, I'm trying to demoralize a barkeep or coerce a barkeep. Okay, I'm going to crush his mug in my hand. You can do that, and then that is probably good enough. But it's still up to GM interpretation when this actually applies. So, yeah. Just ask your GM how lenient are they going to be with this, because if they are being lenient with it, this is an amazing bonus. If they're going to be very strict with it, then it won't be coming up very much, but it's still good whenever it does. Lasting coercion makes coercion a lot better, because normally coercion generally lasts up to a day. That's the longest it'll last, meaning if you want to keep someone coerced, you have to show up at their house or their place of work every single day and intimidate them again. But lasting coercion makes it last a lot longer. Now whenever you successfully coerce someone, the maximum time they comply increases to a week, although it can still be shorter if the GM determines that that makes more sense narratively. If you're legendary at intimidation, then the maximum time increases to a whole month, which makes it so much easier to keep someone coerced. Terrifying Resistance is an interesting feat that is going to be very, very good, or basically useless depending on the type of campaign you're in and the types of enemies that you generally fight. Now, once you have successfully demoralized someone, for the next 24 hours, you get a +1 circumstance bonus on all saving throws against that creature's spells. Keep in mind, this is only spells, meaning that it doesn't give you a bonus against any kind of, say, disease or poison that they're carrying, or any special abilities. But still, a static +1 circumstance bonus to saving throws is legitimately amazing. As long as you can pull this off, it'll greatly increase your effectiveness, but only if you're frequently fighting spellcasters. If you're predominantly fighting a bunch of martial, bruiser sorts of characters, then this is going to be substantially less effective. But still, it is very, very nice. Battlecry is the first master skill feat for Intimidation, and it is very good. Whenever you roll initiative, you can yell a war cry and demoralize a single observed foe as a free action. Also, if you're legendary in Intimidation, then you can use a reaction to demoralize a foe whenever you critically succeed on an attack roll against them. This does use up your reaction, which by the time you hit level 15, which is the lowest point that you can be legendary in Intimidation, it's going to be a lot to use a reaction because you probably have a better use for it, but still, this is a way to get free demoralize attempts. And remember how I said that demoralize is one of the best skill actions in the entire game? Getting it for free is even better. So yeah, this is fantastic. Although do keep in mind that if you're trying to be stealthy at all, screaming a war cry is going to really mess up that plan. So if you're generally a more subterfuge-based party or breaking and entering and generally not trying to make a huge amount of noise, Battlecry might not be the best option. For any other party though, it is legitimately amazing. Terrified Retreat is interesting because it means whenever you critically succeed on a demoralize action against a target whose level is lower than yours, the target is now fleeing for 1 round, in addition to being frightened too, which fleeing is a very, very nasty effect, meaning that they literally just spend their entire turn running away. This is going to be incredibly useful because, yeah, making someone run away from you means that they are basically taken out of the combat for an entire turn, which is insane. Now, I can't say for certain how often you'll be fighting enemies that are lower level than you, because that is entirely up to how your GM likes to design games and levels and encounters and all that. So, if you find that you're fighting against a lot of lower level enemies, then this is amazing. If you are generally not, then it is never going to come into play. Scared to Death is the only legendary skill feat for Intimidation, and it is amazing and really justifies being a legendary skill feat. It gives you the Scared to Death action, which is a single action with the Death, Emotion, Fear, and Incapacitation traits, which, yeah, that's some pretty scary actual tags to have on a action. You now frighten someone so much that they might die. You attempt a Intimidation check against the will DC of a living creature within 30 feet of you. And if they can't hear you or they don't understand the language that you're speaking, you take a -4 penalty on your check. This cannot actually be removed with Intimidating Glare, because Intimidating Glare specifically targets the Demoralize action. So if you're going by rules as written, you cannot actually negate that penalty with Intimidating Glare. But your GM might allow you to if they are being a bit generous. If you critically succeed on that Intimidation check against their will DC, then that target must make a Fortitude save against your Intimidation DC. If they fail, they instantly die. If they succeed at that save, then they become Frightened 2 and Fleeing 1 for 1 round. And it suffers no effect at all on a critical success. That's crazy, but it does have the Incapacitation trait, meaning that creatures above your level actually cannot get this effect at all. But if they're below your level, they're kind of out of luck. If you only succeed on your Intimidation check, the target becomes Frightened 2. If you fail, they become Frightened 1, and if you critically fail, they are completely unaffected. Now, the interesting part of this because obviously this is an insanely strong feat, is the Incapacitation trait. Because can instantly kill someone and take them out of the fight, Incapacitation comes in to save the day, because it means if you're trying to use this on someone who is a higher level than you, then you get 1 degree of success worse, meaning it is impossible to critically succeed on your Intimidation check. But the other effects are still very, very good. Against higher level enemies, Scared to Death is basically just a slightly fancier Demoralize, because if you critically succeed against them, you actually get a success and they're frightened 2, and if you succeed normally against them, they become frightened 1, which is the exact same results as a Demoralize. But against lower level enemies, Scared to Death becomes potentially a one-shot kill, and also just objectively superior to the normal Demoralize action, because on a success they become frightened 2, and on a failure they become frightened 1, rather than needing a success and a critical success to get those effects. And if you critically succeed against them, then there's just a chance they roll over dead or that they immediately run away. So Scared to Death just straight up takes people out of fights. Also, since Scared to Death and Demoralize are their own unique actions, and they both have separate temporary immunity periods, you can actually stack Scared to Death and Demoralize. If you really want to take someone out of a fight, you can first demoralize them, and then use Scared to Death to reduce their will DC to make Scared to Death a bit more deadly. That combination can easily take someone out of a fight if you've got a good Intimidate, which, considering you're legendary at it, you almost certainly have a very good Intimidate. All around, I love the Intimidation skill. It's really interesting and it has a lot of uses both in and out of combat, and its skill feats are wonderful. They improve a lot of the built-in deficiencies of the actions themselves, and it's just really interesting and well designed. Intimidation is fantastic for every character to be trained in, because Demoralize is so good in combat. Like, seriously, never underestimate the effect of applying Frightened in a situation. It's game-changing. Now, it's not always going to be for the best for parties to be super intimidating to solve all of their problems with Intimidation, because, yeah, Coercion works really well, and you can get what you want with it. But if you use it too often, eventually you're going to run into some issues where people are going to start retaliating and being hostile, and maybe all of your enemies will work together because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But all around, I love it. And it really sets up for a lot of interesting story elements. Thanks for watching. This has been an interesting video to make. Final seasons are hell. And yeah, so if you like the video, then, well, why don't you like the video? And if you want to subscribe to see more stuff, then I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you have any constructive criticism or feedback, or really any idea of things that I could be doing better, I'd love to hear it down below in a comment. Until I see you next, live a wonderful life.